We would go ahead and be turning to 3 John. 3 John, that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to be tonight, is the book of 3 John. Continuing our study that we began on Sunday morning. Before we get into 3 John, just a couple of things I want to note. We'll finish 3 John up here tonight, and so Sunday morning, Lord willing, we're going to start the book of Jude, and the questions for the book of Jude are on the back table. So you can pick those up on your way out. The questions for getting ready for the book of Jude. So again, those are on the back table. You can pick those up on your way out. Also, we are, I would guess, probably about a week and a half from starting in the book of Revelation. And so we'll get some material out to you here shortly on the book of Revelation. And some material that several years ago my dad put together, but he quotes from several commentators. So if you want to read through and sort of get a summary from several of the well-respected commentators on Revelation, you'll get some of those quotes. And so we can get that, it'll help you in preparation. We may follow different outlines, but that'll help you sort of condense down some quotations from a number of sources that he'll refer to in that material, so you have that in preparation. I'll try to get that out to you maybe Sunday, but definitely by next Wednesday. Try to get that material out to you, so you have that in advance. If you do want to get some of the commentaries, Haley's commentary, Homer Haley's commentary, Ray Summers' commentary, Harkrider's commentary or workbook are all some commentaries you can get in preparation for that study. But again, I'll try to get you that workbook out here probably. I'll try for Sunday, but definitely try to get it out by next Wednesday. So you have that, so you can start preparing for when we get to Revelation here shortly. Let's get back into 3 John. We started 3 John on Sunday morning. We want to continue our study into the book of 3 John this evening, and then if we've got a little bit of time left at the end, we may go back and sort of hit the highlights of these 3 epistles of John together, just sort of some highlights that we can see. The book of 3 John is about receive faithful teachers, and again, we'll come back to that in more detail here later in our study, but John is dealing with the need to receive faithful teachers as he writes here. So again, as we mentioned a moment ago, the author of the book is the Apostle John. He does not give his name specifically here. He just greets as the elder. And we're not going to go through all the evidence that may be John. We talked about that in 2 John. 2 John was written by the elder to the elect lady. This book is written by the elder to the beloved Gaius. And so we cite the evidence we gave in 2 John that it is the Apostle John. The date of the book, again, I have as be the 90s A.D. Again, when you're reading commentaries, you may find some that date that book much earlier and dated in the 50s or 60s, more in the 60s A.D. That depends on your date for Revelation. So again, we'll get into all that evidence when we actually get into the book of Revelation. But we give the date in the 90s, though, again, our interpretation, unlike Revelation, is not impacted, whether it was written in the 60s or the 90s. The interpretation of the book is going to be the same. The recipient of the book is a man by the name of Gaius. And as we pointed out on Sunday morning, we asked, what do we know about him? And the answer is, we know pretty much nothing. Was he a preacher? I don't know why those are X's. Those were supposed to be question marks. Was he a preacher? I don't know. Maybe he was. Nothing said to indicate that he was. Nothing necessarily tells me he may not be. Perhaps he is, but we don't know. Was he an elder in the church? I don't know. Again, he might have been. Was he an influential member? That I do know, that he at least seems to be a member of some influence and a faithful member that is talked about here in 3 John. But what we do know about him, again, is that he's faithful. As you read John's description of him walking in truth and what John has to say about him, John's describing a man who is faithful. He's describing a man who is hospitable. We saw that in 5 to 7 on on Sunday morning, where it talks about those he receives. So this is a man that is hospitable. This is also a man that is not easily intimidated. And we'll get into that again in a minute, as we cited about his reaction to Diotrephes here in the book. Now, the situation of the writing, as John is writing here in 3 John to Gaius, we need to understand the situation about which John is writing. So as you look into the book of 3 John, and particularly you look at 9 and 10, the background of this is there are some faithful preachers who are coming to the church where Gaius is at. Where is he? I don't know. Again, we mentioned about on Sunday morning, there are some other Gaiuses mentioned earlier in other books in the Scriptures. Perhaps he's one of those at one of those congregations. We don't know for sure. But wherever it is that he is, there are faithful preachers that are coming there, and they're being refused by a man, and not being received by a man by the name of Diotrephes, a man who the Bible says loves the preeminence, or loves to be first in all things. And so, Diotrephes is refusing to receive them, but Diotrephes is not only refusing to receive these faithful teachers, he's putting pressure on those who are receiving them. Now, we didn't get that far Sunday morning, but at the end of verse 10, and it talks about he does not receive the brethren and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. And so here's somebody that receives faithful brethren. Diotrephes doesn't want to accept. Diotrephes says, you're out of the church. So he's putting them out. Again, we ask this question, well, who's Diotrephes? We don't know. Was he an elder who maybe tried to make himself almost a head elder? Was he a member who tried to put himself above others? We're not exactly sure, but we know this. He tried to make himself the chief decision maker here at this congregation, and he's refusing to accept faithful teachers, and yet you look at verses 5 through 8, and Gaius is receiving them anyway. Despite the fact that Diotrephes is going to put the pressure on those that do, despite the fact that Diotrephes might put Gaius out of the church if he finds out what he's doing, Gaius is not intimidated. He's going to receive them anyway. So question 1, going back to our questions that we covered Sunday morning, briefly summarize the book. What did we say the book is really about? It's about receiving faithful teachers, and particularly Gaius is receiving them while Diotrephes is rejecting them and pressuring others to reject faithful teachers. And yet in spite of that, Gaius is receiving them. But again, the theme is receive faithful teachers. The key verse or verses of the book, we said we think that the key verse I think is verse 8. We therefore ought to receive such. You can go back in 5 to 7, he's been explaining about faithful teachers. But we ought to receive such that we may become fellow workers for the truth. And so, we ought to receive those who are faithful teachers. That's the point that John is driving home here in 3 John. Now, verses 1 to 8 is a commendation of Gaius. This book divides down into 4 major sections. Section 1 is the commendation of Gaius in 1 to 8. That's the majority of the book. There's only 14 verses. Over half of it, the verses, is dedicated to commending Gaius, who he's writing to. 9 and 10 is the condemnation of Diotrephes. Diotrephes, he loves the preeminence. He's not receiving faithful teachers. All of that's talked about in just verses 9 and 10. 11 and 12 is the third section. That is the commendation of a man by the name of Demetrius. We haven't gotten to Demetrius yet, but he's commended at 11 to 12. 13 and 14 are John's closing remarks. And so that's the fourth and final section. But the majority of it is the commending of 2 faithful individuals, Gaius and Demetrius, and the condemning of this unfaithful individual in Diotrephes. Now, we already covered 1 through part of verse 10, but we're going to review that here this evening, building us back up to where we were in 9 and 10 on Sunday morning. Beginning at verse 1, in verse 1, John would say, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Now, as we pointed out on Sunday morning, very similar to the point that John opened 2 John with, when he talked about writing to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth. The reason that he has this love for Gaius is not that he doesn't love people that may be outside. That's a different kind of love. You love their souls. You care that they be saved. But this kind of love and relationship he has with Gaius is based off of what fact? They are in the truth. So again, in fact, we'll go ahead and grab question 3 and 4. What caused John to rejoice? And again, I don't know why all the question marks are X's, but those are all question marks. What caused John to rejoice in 3 to 4 is the fact that what? Look at 3 and 4. I received greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you what? Walk in truth. And so, verse 1 is the love for Gaius. 2 to 4 is the fact that Gaius walks in the truth. These are the reasons he's commending him. I have love for you. Why? Because you're in the truth. Here's some evidence he's in the truth. We see it in verse 2 first, though, before he talks about the testimony of others. In verse 2, he says, Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers. Now, as we said on Sunday morning, there are a couple of conclusions that some have reached. I want to say more perhaps. There are some that they have jumped to concerning Gaius. Some have concluded that Gaius perhaps was not well off. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know how you come to that necessarily that conclusion. The other one, and I don't feel like this is as big a jump, though I'm not sure it's what he's saying, is that Gaius perhaps wasn't in the best of health because John wants his soul to be like, or his health to be just like his soul or his spiritual health. I don't know that that's necessarily what he means. Perhaps he's just saying, I hope you continue to prosper in your health, just as your spiritual health is prospering. But here's the point, and we asked this on Sunday morning, by way of practical application and a practical lesson for us, is we need to ask ourselves, what would my health look like if it looked like my physical health, if it looked like my spiritual health? You know, if John was writing to you, if an apostle was writing to me, could they say to us, I hope that your health prospers like your soul? Or as we said Sunday, maybe they'd have to say, you know what, I sure hope your physical health doesn't get like your spiritual health, because then you're in a lot of trouble. And so we need to ask ourselves that question. And here, as John is commending Gaius, he says, I hope your health's like your soul, which tells me, though I know very little about Gaius from this book, it does tell me a lot about him, that here's a strong, faithful individual, that John says, I hope your physical health is just like your spiritual health.
Yes, makes me think about where it says, though the outward man perish, the inward man will be renewed day by day. Inevitably, if you get old enough, you're going to have some health issues. Unless you just drop over dead with a heart attack or whatever. But in spite of the fact that the outward man is, each day is deteriorating to a certain extent, you can take great consolation in knowing that does not have to happen in the spiritual man.
You're right. And I think some of the things we talked about Sunday as we looked at heaven on Sunday morning, and we talked about the fact that heaven's a place, in our first song, we long to be, and we looked at like 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul talks about the slight affliction for a moment because of what it's working for us. That's because Paul knew his spiritual health was still strong, and he had that hope of heaven. Let's go to verse 3 and 4 now. For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. And so John is not only saying that from what he knows Gaius is in the truth, others have come to John and said what? Here's a man that walks in the truth. Here's a man that's living faithfully. Again, perhaps, and I don't know that this is the case, but perhaps, based off some of the other things he's saying in the book, maybe some of those of 5 to 8 that we're going to get to in a minute that he received, maybe there's some of the ones that came to John and were saying, you know what, there's this man at this congregation by the name of Diotrephes that wouldn't have us, but I tell you what, there's this strong, faithful brother there by the name of Gaius who received us. That's a man who walks in the truth. It wasn't just that Gaius thought he did. It wasn't just that John said he did. There were others who could see that by the way he conducted himself. And so in verse 4, John said, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. There's joy because John knows that Gaius is walking in the truth.
Yes. This makes me think of the unity that's like a triangle. You have unity horizontally with your brothers and sisters in Christ that are truly walking in truth. But it's also with Christ. And if you sever that with Christ, you may have a thing in common. You may go to an assembly, whatever it's called, and you may have unity, but it's all be based on truth. So in my mind, I picture a triangle, and then you see that bond that's at among brothers and sisters in Christ that are walking in the truth, that's also connected to Christ. And it doesn't get any better than that.
You're right. And again, as we're going to get to later on, we mentioned on Sunday morning, the reason we have to have teaching and preaching on the issues like fellowship is because there's two problems. We can't fellowship those outside the truth, 2 John, but we need to fellowship those who are in the truth. We must fellowship them, 3 John. And you're right, there's that connection to God, and so that's why later on John's going to tell him these are the people we need to receive because they're in that relationship with God, and thus we should have that relationship with them. Let's go ahead and get 5 to 8 real quick since we already covered it on Sunday morning, so we can cover the rest of the book here tonight. 5 to 8 is John talking about the fact that Gaius received faithful brethren. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers, who have borne witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well. Because they went forth for his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles, we therefore ought to receive such that we may become fellow workers for the truth. As we pointed out on Sunday morning here, 5 to 7 suggests that perhaps Gaius not only was just receiving them in the fact that he was willing to listen to them, it seems perhaps Gaius is even opening up his home to some of them and taking them in and showing some hospitality. But on top of that, verses 7 and 8 would lead us to the conclusion that Gaius is also financially supporting, or at least in this moment, financially giving to help those teaching the truth. Because they went forth, verse 7, for his name's sake, taking nothing for the Gentiles, we therefore ought to receive such. Now, we mentioned on Sunday morning that in the New King James Version as well, translations based upon the majority, or Textus Receptus, but majority text, they use the phrase, they use the term receive, because the Greek word there is the Greek word for receiving. It's a different Greek word that occurs in the critical text. So, if you have a New King James, I think the King James, or some of them do this, if you have a New King James with the full set of translations, out next to the word support, you're going to see a footnote. You'll see a number. You look at your marginal or footnote in your Bible, and it'll say the NU says support. NU is the Nestle Allen United Bible Society. That's the critical text. In the critical text, the word is again the word for support. So it doesn't just say that he's saying, you know what, when they come, we need to have fellowship with them, but even sharing in, and with the financial support, sharing in with them in the teaching of the gospel. Verse 7, they received nothing from, or they took nothing from the Gentiles. They weren't taking it from the Gentiles, so John's saying, Gaius, you know what, go ahead and give them that support as they continue on in preaching the gospel.
Previous letter was to don't receive them into your house. So somebody brings a different doctrine, it's just the opposite. You don't receive those people. I just thought that was interesting. Don't know about the Greek word for it, but it does say not to receive them.
You're right, and so I think receiving, I think receive support. Obviously, if you have the right to support them, you need to be receiving them. And if it's the word for receive, the context in 5 to 7 still indicates that there was some support that was going on. But I think, as he's telling them there, you need to receive and support them and share in them so that your fellow workers for the truth, because these are faithful brethren, the kind that Diotrephes is trying to put out. So question 4, who does it say we should receive in verse 8? That is faithful teachers and preachers. Yes. And so perhaps in taking in strangers, he's taking in just anybody that comes, maybe opening a door and an opportunity to teach them. Perhaps even to an extent, he may be taking in, I think it's possible too that it may be referring to, he's taking in brethren that in terms of knowing them personally, they are still yet strangers, but either way, he's taking in people that he doesn't really, know. You typically, if somebody comes to you and is in need of something, say, yeah, you know what, come stay in my, and you don't know him, you don't say, hey, come stay in my spare bedroom. But that's the kind of man that Gaius was. Even when he didn't know him, he was willing to show hospitality. In fact, the word hospitality actually means to entertaining of strangers. Coming to verse 9 now. 9 to 10, again, is the condemnation of Diotrephes. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. So let's go ahead and get our question 5. What did Diotrephes like to do or like to have? The preeminence. Or he liked to put himself first. In fact, this is what the Legacy Standard does. This is a side note. The Legacy Standard and the New American Standard often will not translate it preeminence. They'll translate it first in all things, which is what preeminence means. But even in Colossians, that Christ is first in all things. And so that, that's what they're saying. He likes the preeminence, or he likes to make himself be first. He thinks he puts himself above others. Yes, you're right. He likes to be on a pedestal. He's elevating himself, which then leads to the problem of the latter half of 9 and 10. He does not receive us. And I take it in verse 9, by the way, at the end of verse 9, based off what he said at the beginning, that it's not just that he doesn't receive them in person. I think I can reach that conclusion fairly well, that he wouldn't receive some faithful teachers in person. But when John says he does not receive us, John then says, I'm going to deal with him in verse 10 when? When he comes. Perhaps John has not been there yet to have the opportunity to deal with him. I don't think it's a far stretch to reach. I think if John had been there and Diotrephes had actually turned him away in person, John would have dealt with him when? Right then, right there. I think what he's saying, and he doesn't receive us, he doesn't even recognize what the authority that was given to the apostles in the spreading of the gospel. And so John wrote to the church. Right now he's writing to an individual. John wrote a letter to the church. Diotrephes won't receive them, again, I think being the apostles, or receive us. And he rejected that, including, I think the point is in verse 9, he rejected the letter that I sent to the church, to where the church didn't even get that. Because Diotrephes made sure they didn't see it because he would not receive it.
Yes. Think about Jesus when he appeared to Saul on the road to Damascus. And Saul, later the Apostle Paul, he wasn't actually doing it directly to Jesus. But since he was doing something wrong to the saints, that equated to doing it against Jesus. And then, in Matthew 25, he's talking about both the good and the bad, showing this hospitality, what kind of referred to here. And he said, inasmuch as you did it to these, or inasmuch as you didn't do it one of these little ones, you've either done it or not done it to me. But that's pretty scary. If I do something against you, it's indirectly, it's kind of like I'm doing it against Jesus if you're one of his, ministers. And then I think about 2 Thessalonians, it says, it is a righteous thing for God to repay the tribulation, those that trouble you. So I shouldn't do it because I don't want to treat people that way. But there's a day of reckoning coming if I'm mistreating God's people.
You're right, and Diotrephes was going to learn in the short term, I think, based off what John said. Diotrephes was going to learn in the short term. He wasn't supposed to do that. But if Diotrephes didn't change, he was ultimately going to learn that for the long term as well. Question number 6. What did Diotrephes not do? We said what he did. What he did was like to have the preeminence or be first. What did he not do according to question 6? He didn't receive the faithful teachers. And again, I think particularly, remember this, just as a side note, not always the case, but there are a number of times in context context will determine it, where one of the apostles, Paul, John, they'll say something like us. I think, this is an example, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and in verse 7, the treasure in earthen vessels. I think when you look at the text around that, talking about the apostles, not just any preacher of the gospel, though that point could be made as well. John here, when he says he didn't receive us, he's saying he did not receive and recognize the teaching of the apostles, which is to not recognize the teaching of Christ. And you can go back, Acts chapter 2, that is referred to as the apostles' doctrine, but that was the gospel message. Let's get the rest of verse 10 now. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does. We'll come back to that in a minute. prating against us with malicious words. Again, who's the us? I think he's probably talking about the apostles. I know he's at least talking about one apostle, because John's one of the apostles, not just a faithful teacher, but an apostle that he's rejecting. And not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Which again, it leads me more to believe the us is the apostles. He doesn't receive us, that is, he doesn't receive the apostles. He doesn't receive the brethren, faithful brethren either, verse 10, and he puts out those who do. And so he's not receiving us. He opposes those who don't receive us, the end of verse 10. Real quick, the word prating, New King James. Wicked nonsense, English Standard Version. Unjustly disparaging us with wicked words, the Legacy Standard Bible would say. That word means to indulge in an utterance that makes no sense. That is, he's just really making empty talk, empty accusations. It seems he's making these accusations trying to turn others against the apostles. And so he's doing that, and John says in verse 10, because of that, I will deal with him when I come. Let's go to 11 to 12 now. The commendation of Demetrius. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Let's go ahead and get this next question. I'll come back as to how this is a commendation of Demetrius in a minute. But question 7, what should we not imitate according to verse 11? Evil. Now, I don't have a question on this, but we'll give one here on the fly. What should we imitate on the flip side of that? What is good? Right? Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God. Now again, and if we have a few minutes remaining, we may sort of quickly hit a couple of highlights. We got about 5 minutes left. We may hit a few highlights of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. There's a lot of parallels between them. Remember, in 1 John, our key to 1 John was about abiding in God, being one that's of God. 2 John talked about walking in the truth, and those that walk in the truth or abide in the doctrine of Christ has the Father and the Son. So verse 11, he who does good is of God. What's doing good? Well, take what he says here in 3 John, take what he said in 2 John. That's one that's living in harmony with the will of God. That's the one that does good. Not just that's a good person. Doing good in the sense they're doing the will of God. But he who does evil has not seen God. Now, what is doing evil? Well, if doing good is keeping the will of God, then evil would be doing anything that transgresses the will of God. Again, 2 John verse 9, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. Doesn't mean you have to be a terribly immoral individual. Just anything contrary to God's law, whether we don't do what he tells us to do or we do things he tells us not to do, that's evil. That one has not seen God and is not of God. But verse 12 now, Demetrius has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our testimony is true. He then mentions this man Demetrius. I don't know much about Demetrius, but I do know this. Demetrius, like Gaius, is a good man. Because he mentions that he has a good testimony, and he mentions from 3 different sources. Source number 1, a good testimony from all. I take that from all. He has a good testimony from brethren. Right? If you go ask the brethren where they're at, well, will they tell you about Demetrius? That's a good, faithful man. But I take from that too, and he says, what if you go ask those in the town that aren't Christians, what do they say about him? Well, I may not agree with him, but that's a good man. He has a good testimony from all. Verse 12. Let's get the last part of verse 12, and then I'll come back to the middle one. And we also bear witness, and you know that our testimony is true. What are they bearing witness? Who's the we? I think he's talking about, again, the apostles, particularly John, being the time frame that we're writing, who's left, that this is an individual who is faithful, but the most important one here is the one in the middle. And from the truth itself. How does one have a good testimony from the truth? Absolutely. You lay his life beside God's word. He's living by what it by what it says. And so here's an individual again who is a faithful individual who has a good testimony from all. I think that's those within, those without, from the truth, and from the apostles. Let's get 13 and 14, and then we'll quickly just hit a couple of things I want to hit as we wrap up this evening. 13 and 14 are the closing remarks, and there are 2 points he makes. One is he hopes to see him soon. He says, I hope to see you soon. I had many things to write, but I do not wish to write to you with pen and ink, but I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. The 2 shortest books of the New Testament are 2nd and 3rd John. Jude and Philemon are also a chapter. They're longer, though. 25 verses were added later, but even when you go through it, just looking at it on the page, Jude and Philemon are much longer than 2nd and 3rd John. The 2 shortest books of the New Testament, 2nd and 3rd John, in both of them, John said, I hope to see you soon, so I have more things to say, but I'm going to say it where? Face to face. So he's offering some encouragement now, but there's more he wants to say, but he wants to say that in person. The end of verse 14 then, our friends greet you and greet the friend. Our peace to you, our friends greet you, greet the friends' name. And sending back saying, all right, so let's go to question 8. We may not have time to review that. That's okay. Question number 1, practical lessons. What are some practical lessons we learn from this book? What are some lessons you take away?
You need to be hospitable.
Need to be hospitable.
You need to be in truth.
Need to be in the truth.
You need
Love our brethren.
Love your brethren.
fear God, not fear man. Because like you said, the thing that enabled Gas was that he didn't fear this wicked man, he feared God.
You're right. Fear God and not man. That's a good point. That's why he's able to do what he did. A couple of others are times got away from us. We mentioned some of these already. We should want our health to be like our soul. And so we should be able to say that I hope my physical health is prospering like my spiritual health. We should have joy over others that walk in the truth, verse 4. John pointed out he had joy because Gaius was in the truth. That should cause us to rejoice to see others in the truth. We must receive faithful teachers, verse 8. Not a suggestion, we must receive them. We should imitate faithful brethren, verse 11. Imitate good. And then he talks about Demetrius in his testimony. I think the point is, here's an individual who sets a good example that can be imitated. And finally, we should want the truth to give a good testimony of us, verse 12. Like we said with Demetrius, the truth, not only was there good testimony from all and from the apostles, but from the truth itself. We should be able to ask ourselves, what does the truth, what kind of testimony does the truth give about me? That's the book of 3 John. Our time has gotten away from us here now this evening. So again, Sunday morning, Lord willing, we're going to start the book of Jude. Cover it Sunday, probably Sunday and Wednesday, maybe. But we'll introduce and start the book of Jude on Sunday morning. And if you have questions for that, they're on the back table where the questions are for John. If there's any material left for 2nd and 3rd John you won't, go out and get that that you did pick up a couple of weeks. I'm going to have to put out so we can have that space to off. That material back if you want 2nd and 3rd John, or you want material and then again start the book.